Some fears, they can be ignored. Some nightmares can be forgotten. But there are some that just never leave. Welcome to the Walking Dread podcast.
Ooh, spooky.
Every episode, we take you on this journey into the macabre. Stories that, well, they feel too real to be fiction. You know what I mean? But they're too terrifying to be true.
Exactly that sweet spot.
Yeah. And joining me is our expert in fear and folklore, the brilliant and fearless Julia.
Well, hello, everyone. Delighted to be back. And thanks for that intro, Adrian. Really sets the mood.
So for all of you listening, I know you guys are the kind of people who love getting right into the heart of a story, especially if it's, a little unsettling, a little creepy.
We love a good scare.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing today on the Walking Dread podcast. We're diving deep into the Unwritten, this short story that one of you lovely listeners sent in.
Such a creepy little tale.
It is. And along with the story, we got some really cool articles about the psychology of fear and the power of stories. And, well, our mission today is to kind of unpack all of this and see what it tells us about fear itself.
And how easily, I think, the line between fiction and reality can just blur.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Julia, the Unwritten has this, truly disturbing premise.
Oh, totally.
It's about this supernatural storyteller whose tales, they don't just stay in the imagination, they start to, reshape reality. And it all happens to this young girl, Emma.
Yeah, it's almost like the storyteller has a direct line into her world.
A direct line, yeah. And we're going to see how she confronts this entity and the terrifying consequences that follow.
Buckle up, folks, because it's a wild ride.
So right from the beginning, Emma's different from her siblings. They love bedtime stories. But Emma, she's completely freaked out by this voice that's telling them the stories.
Right, and it describes it as a silky voice, but with this, underlying creepiness to it.
Yeah, an undercurrent that made her skin crawl, the story says. You sent me this article about sensory perception and fear responses. Could this be what's happening with Emma?
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about it. A voice out of nowhere, no face, no body attached to it. It's like instinctively our brains are like, wait, hold on, something's not right here.
Danger.
Exactly. And that article, it talks about how certain sounds can trigger a much stronger fear response, especially if they're unfamiliar or, unexpected.
So it's not just the words, it's the actual sound of the voice.
The tone, the way it kind of wraps around you. Oh, it's just creepy, like those old stories, about voices whispering in the woods.
Yeah, oh yeah. Always a bad sign.
Right. Always a bad sign. So Emma's reaction, I think it makes sense, right? It's like her intuition screaming at her.
And her intuition is right. Because if things start getting really weird, the story says her drawings start to bleed, like grotesque figures just seep out of the paper.
Ugh, that imagery is just so vivid and disturbing.
And then her shadow starts stretching, growing impossibly long. It's like the supernatural is literally bleeding into her world.
And this is where I think that article you mentioned about children's perception of fear comes in.
Okay, how so?
Well, kids, especially younger ones, their grip on reality, it's not as solid as ours, right?
Yeah.
So fears, they manifest in very real ways for them.
So for Emma, these bleeding drawings, the freaky shadow, it's not just her imagination.
It's her reality. It's like the story, the horror of it. It's actually changing her world around her.
Oh, wow. And it's not just her. Even her classmates notice. At first, they make fun of her, but then it shifts to pity. Like they can sense something is really wrong.
Right. It's palpable.
Okay, so here's where things get really, really interesting.
Lay it on me.
This voice, the storyteller, it's not angry about Emma's fear. It's actually pleased, like it's feeding off of it.
It's almost like her fear gives it power, right? Makes it stronger.
Yeah, and then Emma, she does something unexpected. She decides she's going to become the hero of this horror story. She's going to fight back. You mentioned this psychological concept in your notes about trauma and regaining control. Could that be what's happening here?
Absolutely. When we experience trauma, this overwhelming fear, we lose control. And so sometimes, even in a terrifying situation, we try to claw back some agency, some sense of power.
So becoming the hero, it's Emma's way of fighting back.
In a way, yeah. It's her way of trying to shape the narrative, even though it's still a horrifying one. It gives her, I don't know, maybe a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going.
But like in so many horror stories, this attempt at heroism, it kind of backfires.
Oh, it backfires big time.
Her days at school, they become these personalized nightmares. The hallway becomes a monster's throat. Her teacher's voice sounds demonic. Even her crush, this boy she likes, he's transformed into something grotesque. It's like this voice is literally molding her reality to fit the story it's telling. You sent me an article about the power of narratives. Is this what Emma's experiencing, like a forced immersion in a horror story that's rewriting her world?
That's exactly it. It's not just telling a story. It's like this voice is holding the pen, writing her life. And like that article said, stories, they have this incredible power to shape how we see the world. But here, that power is like weaponized.
And it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what can you do when the world itself is against you?
Right. And it highlights this really scary idea, right? The idea of unchecked narrative control. Like, what happens when someone else has the power to literally dictate your reality? It's chilling.
It really is. And you think it can't get any worse, and then it does. Emma tries to ignore the voice, to just have a normal day. And what happens? Dinner vanishes. Poof, just gone.
Like it never existed.
It's like even her hunger is part of the story now. This escape, it's impossible. You shared a piece about folklore and the importance of rules in supernatural deals. Is Emma breaking some kind of rule, but trying to ignore the voice?
I was thinking the same thing. Like, so many folktales are these unspoken rules, And maybe by not playing along, not being a willing audience, Emma's violated some kind of agreement, some supernatural contract. And the vanishing dinner, that's the consequence.
Ooh, that's a really interesting thought. So it's like the voice is saying, you're in my story now. No escaping.
No escaping.
It's crazy how the other kids' reactions to Emma change. At first, it's just fear. But then it becomes envy. Like they almost envy her struggle.
That is so fascinating, isn't it?
It is. Why would they envy someone trapped in a nightmare?
Well, think about it. Emma, she's actively fighting something. She's not just passively experiencing fear like they are. It's like, even in this horrible situation, she has some agency, some control. And that's something we all crave, even in the face of fear. It's like, okay, maybe I can't beat this monster, but at least I can fight back.
It's the human need to feel like we're not totally helpless.
Exactly.
But we can't forget how grim Emma's situation is. She's not some typical hero. The story describes her as a puppet. Her life, a horrific spectacle. It's like her fight isn't about winning, it's about survival. The title, The Unwritten, it takes on this whole other meaning, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so chilling. The Unwritten, like a story with no boundaries, no ending, just infinite possibilities for horror. It speaks to this deep-seated fear of the unknown, of being totally at the mercy of something you can't control.
An escape. Forget about it. Even sleep, which should be a sanctuary, a break from the horror, even that offers her no relief. So she's constantly looking for a way out, a twist, a clue in the voice's narration. One of those articles talked about hope in the face of adversity. Could this be Emma's way of coping?
Oh, absolutely. Even when things are at their darkest, we cling to hope. That instinct to find a solution, a way out, it's incredibly powerful. But in horror stories, that hope can be so cruel, It can lead you on, give you false promises, and ultimately leave you more broken than before.
Yeah, like a twisted game. And the way this overview of the story ends, it's so unsettling because there's no promise of a happy ending. Emma's fight, it's ongoing, no clear path to safety. It's the kind of story that just sticks with you, which I guess is what we aim for here on the Walking Dread podcast.
Absolutely. I mean, The Unwritten, it checks all the boxes. It blurs that line between reality and nightmare. It explores this deep psychological terror. It's got a compelling protagonist facing this unknown, terrifying force. It's classic Walking Dread material.
And the way the story unfolds, it follows this classic horror arc. You start with normalcy, then there's this unsettling intrusion, things get progressively worse, the darkness takes hold, attempts to resist backfire, and then you're left in this constant state of dread.
And it's that structure, that descent into darkness, that really keeps you on the edge of your seat.
So for all of you listening, we're bombarded with stories all the time, right? The news, our entertainment, social media, it's everywhere. And it makes you think, how much do those stories shape our reality? How much do they influence our fears?
That's the question, isn't it? What happens when those stories, intentionally or not, start to make us feel afraid, helpless? How much control do we really have over the narratives that shape our fears?
A chilling thought for sure. If you found this deep dive into the unwritten as unsettling as we did, and if you're interested in exploring more stories that make you question the nature of reality and fear, make sure to rate and follow the Walking Dread podcast.
We'll be back with more chilling tales. Sweet dreams, everyone, if you can sleep.
If you can sleep.